Donald Trump is not the type of person who likes to be told that he's unpopular or that he's losing in something. And recent reports indicate that there isn't a lot of fire or a lot of attention being paid by the American people toward his inauguration. Not a lot of people are actually going to show up. And he absolutely hates that. It drives him insane because he wants to be part of this popularity contest. Now, to give you an idea of what his inauguration will be like in terms of attendance compared to Obama's, DC's Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management is expecting anywhere between 800,000 to 900,000 people to attend the swearing-in ceremony. That's a lot. And the parade. In comparison, an estimated 1.8 million people attended President Barack Obama's first inauguration. Now, to be fair, President Barack Obama's inauguration was undoubtedly a moment in history. It was the first time that we elected a biracial president. So I could understand how he would have more people attending than anyone else, to be honest, unless there was, someone who's not Christian or someone who's not male who gets elected into office, because that would be historic as well.
No, but to be fair to Trump, he's also historic. He's the first orange president we're ever going to have.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Right. So a lot of orange Americans are headed down to D.C. as we speak. No, that's part of it.
Yeah.
The other part of it is when Trump's approval ratings now are hovering between 37, I think I saw 44 once. Let's call it 40%, okay? Now, for an incoming president, that is historically miserable. George W. Bush also won an election where he did not win the popular vote, but came in at 61%. Barack Obama, when he got the 1.8 million people to show up, came in at an 84% approval rating.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's why he has twice as many people who came to his inauguration. It makes sense. He was literally twice as popular as you.
Right. Now, honestly, who cares? Don't draw attention to the fact that there isn't as much excitement surrounding your inauguration. But Trump can't help himself. So, of course, he starts making statements about how popular he is and how much everyone loves him. Here's a quote. "I saw the bikers for Trump. Boy, they had a scene today. And they had a scene today where they had helicopters flying over a highway someplace in this country." Someplace in this country. And
I wonder if he looked it up or not and verified.
And they had thousands of those guys coming into town. Okay, first, bikers for Trump obviously support Trump. They exist, and they do plan on attending. However, there are memes, pictures, and videos circulating and going viral around the internet indicating that, here are the bikers, here they are on their way to DC for the inauguration. The only problem is they're all fake. They're all either photoshopped or they're from events from years ago. So there's an example of a video that obviously is not in DC because of the green grass, and it's wintertime. Just let's keep that in mind. Okay. So let me give you some examples. There was a photo from Twitter handle WikiFleek Memes claiming that 200,000 bikers were on their way to DC. It's also fake. The origin of the photo comes from a 2013 blog post on bikers on the Spanish website Oi. Also, as of this week, there are still 3 times more bus permits issued for the protests on Saturday, namely for the Women's March on Washington, than for Trump's inauguration. Thus far...
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's a stunning number.
It is. Thus far, the District Department of Transportation has filed 393 bus permits for Trump's inauguration. Events DC, which is in charge of the Women's March, received 1,200 bus permits.
Bus permit requests, by the way.
Yes.
It's not like they're not giving the Trump guys permits. He won. He's going to be the president. I've never seen a situation where the protesters at an inauguration are larger than the actual supporters at the inauguration. Not at Bush, not at anyone. I mean, look, you could argue that a lot of people didn't like Obama by 2012. That's actually not empirically true based on the popularity he had back then. But you could argue that, and the protesters were shao. They were tiny compared to the actual inauguration events. In this case, it's lopsided. So of course it drives Trump crazy. But what's amazing about him is, A, doesn't care about facts at all, right? So that picture's not true. Who cares, right? 2, he's the president of the United States, and he still doesn't check anything.
He doesn't care,
though. Wouldn't you get embarrassed? Like, hey, Donald, you schmuck. That's a picture from 2013. It's from a Spanish magazine. And then he goes, oi. But he doesn't. He doesn't care.
But here's the reason why he can do that and he will continuously get away with it. He understands that his base also isn't interested in the facts. I mean, he lied again and again, not only during the election, but after the election. He lies, he can't help himself. And it's not enough to convince his supporters that he is not the right person to lead this country. As I've said before, the scandals don't matter, the lies don't matter. The only thing that will matter in the end is what he will do to this economy, right? As soon as Americans feel the economic burden of Donald Trump, I think that's when things will matter. But in the meantime, it doesn't matter. He can go ahead and share fake memes as much as he wants and then complain about fake news simultaneously.
All right, now let's hit him with the wall of meat.
Okay, so Chris Cox is the founder of Bikers for Trump. And recently, he was on Fox talking about just how much he loves Trump and how much he plans on supporting him. Take a look.
We're a force to be dealt with. We're a political phenomenon. We are in no way, shape, or form vigilantes. We will have a presence during the presidential inauguration. We have full confidence in the Metropolitan Police Department, the Park Police, and the Capitol Police. We believe they've learned from mistakes that were made in Chicago and Arizona, and we have the utmost confidence in them. But in the event that we are needed, we certainly will form a wall of meat.
What does that mean? What does that mean, a wall of meat?
A wall of meat.
Well, we'll be shoulder to shoulder with our brothers, and we'll be toe to toe with anyone that is going to break through any police barriers, that's going to be assaulting women, spitting on them, throwing things at them.
Who's going to pay for that wall? I know you're going to build it with your meat. By the way, the guy who wants to build a wall of meat, his last name is Cox.
Oh my God. Look.
Cox comes out and says, I'm going to build a wall of meat. That's what Cox is going to do.
Look, they support Trump, more power to them. They want to build a wall of meat, do you, boo? I do think it's interesting, though, that in the last part of his statement there, he said something about protecting women from being assaulted or spit on. The protesters that are going to protest him at the inauguration and the day after, they're called the March for Women. Right? And so I don't think anyone's interested. I don't believe for a second that anyone related to that movement or that protest is looking for violence or looking for trouble. Will there be a provocateur? Will there be people trying to cause problems? I have no doubt. Okay, that always happens. But overall, no one's going there looking to abuse women.
Okay, I'm going to make a random comment about the Fox and Friends B team. Because they brought the B team in for some reason, okay? And they just look like new puppets, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like they move like the Muppets, like, oh, wall of meat. They crack me up, man. I think that between the three of them, they got about 2 brain cells they rub together, and they're like, wall meat. So, all right, guys, if you're Trump supporters and you love this, how about it, Hoss? Go join the wall. Be part of the wall of meat, which is hilarious. Make the vegetarians pay for it. Okay?
I like my meat tight. Tighten up my meat.
That's also from Fox and Friends. Once you become a member of the Young Turks, you're going to be thinking, Sarabies! TYTnetwork.com/join.